as we continue in our journey in understanding the Sheva Mitzvos and how to teach the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, one of the questions we must learn from, or look at, and then learn from the answers is, we have seen a number of communities of Bnei Noach, of Chasidei Umas Ha'olam have sprung up around the world in different places. And yet we see that sometimes we don't hear about them again, sometimes we don't see them, certainly don't see them spreading. And the question is, what is the problem? What is the issue? We know that all of humanity is meant to come and worship the one God, the creator of heaven and earth, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the prophets prophesize that all the nations of the world are going to serve together the one God, the only God. And we know that the temple in Jerusalem is going to be the house of prayer for all the nations. So the question is, we would expect at least linear growth. We would expect even more exponential growth. And we'd expect even more explosive growth. So what's really the issue when these communities understand and they embrace the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach? What happens? So that's what we're going to discuss today. And I encourage you to take notes and be able to recognize these signs in any community or any group of people that you work with in order to be able to foster a continuous growth and a stable foundation for community and its continued growth and expansion across the world. Now, many years ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. On the front page of the Wall Street Journal, many people remember the article. In the human interest article, that's usually in the center bottom of the newspaper, on the first page, every day there's such a column. And this column was about a community in Tennessee that had their pastor and the community had come to realize that they wanted to embrace the one God of Israel. And they had begun to serve God without any idol worship. They'd taken down the cross from the church steeple. And it was quite an interesting article about this community. Now, this article came out in the early 1990s, and in fact, I've looked for it. It's not on the Wall Street Journal database, and I haven't been able to locate a copy of it. But I remember seeing that article at the time in the early 1990s, and the question is, why is it that all these years after that Wall Street Journal article that profiled this community in Tennessee that had embraced the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, and embraced the 7 laws of Noach as they apply to all mankind, how is it that now in the year 2020, that has not spread like wildfire through the United States, and throughout the entire world? In fact, only a few people even remember that article, and I can't even find it online. If you do have a copy of the article, please send it my way. I'd love to read it again and see it. But the answer to the question as to why that community did not have explosive growth and expand to other communities around the United States and around the world is actually answered in the article itself. In that Wall Street Journal article, it says that the pastor who had become with the congregation observant of the 7 laws of Noah, and as I said, they absolved themselves of any sort of idol worship and removed any traces from their building, said that he teaches his congregation, and the congregation practices the teaching that they should not proselytize anyone else. They should not try to influence any other human beings to serve the one God that they come to recognize. Now that's the answer why it didn't spread. Because something went wrong in their understanding of the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. Something went wrong in their understanding of what it means to be a servant of God Almighty. And they somehow got a wire crossed inside to say that they were not supposed to try to teach anyone else what they had learned. So then what happens is that one congregation becomes one isolated congregation, doesn't spread. So that's the first reason that congregations don't spread, because some of them get this idea and it's not clear where they get it from, and it's actually an incorrect idea, because Judaism itself, while it has a principle not to proselytize human beings to become observers of Judaism in the context of the 7 laws, in the context of the 613 mitzvahs that apply to all of the Jewish people, But there is an obligation and a commandment on the Jewish people to teach all of humanity about the greatness and oneness of God that loves every human being. And we see this by the first Jew, Abraham, Avram Avinu, who took upon himself, his love for Hashem was so great that he wanted to teach every single human being. So if a Jew is required to go out and teach all of humanity, that's the case of any human being that comes to a recognition of truth, has an obligation to tell everyone else about that truth. Tell everyone else that there's a loving creator that's creating them and bringing them life and giving them life at every instant and is providing everything they need. This is the fundamental purpose of our existence, is to acknowledge our creator. So for a person to come to the conclusion that it's okay for them to know about something and then go ahead and just keep it to themselves, that itself is a terrible misuse of their energy and misuse of their enthusiasm, and in fact indicates a lack in their real enthusiasm, because as the Maimonides Rambam says in the third mitzvah of his positive commandments that he lists, the mitzvah of loving Hashem, that if a person really loves Hashem, you will see it by the way he teaches the non-Jews, because he's so excited about this loving God that he's come to recognize and come to experience in his own life that he wants to teach everyone else. So therefore, it's a fundamental part of any human being that once they recognize truth, they want to share that, especially when they recognize something so exciting as knowing that there's a God that's creating them, and feeling gratitude for God and feeling appreciation and feeling God's love. They're going to want to tell everyone about that, especially when they see other human beings that are suffering as a result of that lack of that knowledge. So that's the first example that I wanted to share of why a community won't grow. If it builds into itself almost a self-destructive concept, a self-limiting concept that prevents it from actually carrying out the true purpose of its coming into being, which is that the community came to a certain recognition of God, that they're not going to teach other people. That's a unfortunate lacking in their education, and as a result, they're unable to spread. And that's self-evident in and of itself as a cause. Now, another challenge that I discovered in speaking to people and interacting with people was that in Judaism, there's a special concept of educating our children. And the concept of educating our children is a fundamental part of every moment of our breath. That in Jewish practice, in Jewish belief, and Jewish thought, the entire role and purpose of a parent is to bring into the world a person who will emulate his ways and even improve on the ways of the parent, and be a better servant of the Creator than the parent himself. And so every moment is in consideration of setting the right example for the child, and every moment is in consideration of transmitting concepts, ideas, passion, and love to the child, that they will recognize that God is the source of everything they have, and God is the source of all good and bounty in the world, and really of everything. And therefore, it's right to acknowledge God and right to thank God. So that's what is ingrained and found in the very blood of a Jewish person. And we see this by Abraham, that this is something he commanded, he instructed, he taught his son Isaac, and then he went on to teach his son, and Jacob taught his sons. So Isaac taught Jacob, Jacob taught his sons, and that's something that became ingrained in the entire Jewish people. So this a rabbi who was very much involved with teaching non-Jews, Sheva Mitzvos Bnai Noach, explained to me that he did not see the same concept coming naturally to parents that were non-Jewish parents that were observant of the 7 laws of Noah. That while they themselves were very sincere and very observant and very passionate and very much into studying and practice and of learning God's way, that at the same time, these people did not have the direction and the understanding and the drive to teach their children. So what happened was that there was this disconnect. There would be a generation of parents, and then the children just did not in any way follow. They did not have the means or the fabric or the fiber to transmit this love of God and this knowledge. And that was one of his observations. So what that leads to is an interesting observation, and one of his explanations why the people that he taught and the communities that he helped establish did not take off was this lack of what's called in Hebrew chinuch. Chinuch is more than just education. It's more than just schooling. It's a process of leadership by example, and the child emulating the role model. That's what chinuch is. It's a process of guidance and emulation, and that was lacking. So what that tells us then is that something that we have to learn when we're teaching non-Jews the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. We have to not only reach the person that we are talking to, but make sure that we set an example on how to reach their children. And we see this by the Rebbe's particular emphasis on directly teaching the children, that when we're going to make programs and classes and so forth, it has to be directed to the children, both for the sake of the children, that the children should grow up in a God-fearing environment, understand that there's a God, there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears, and there's a master of this world, but also to teach the parents how they should change their focus and start to understand the concept and live the concept of chinuch, of being able to raise their children to emulate the ways of righteousness and justice, and then be able to create a civilized world. That just a person in Jewish belief, we understand, and it's just part of our fiber, that we understand that our success in the world is in how our children are raised to emulate us. And that is part of the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying. Part of the command of being fruitful and multiplying is to be fruitful and multiply people who are productive and contributing and creating a successful civilization. And in the case of the Jewish people, bringing the holiness into the world. That's what we are understanding. That's the sign of our success in the world, is our ability to transmit that passion and that drive to our children to bring this message into the world. So that's something that we have to recognize, that we have to transmit that concept to our students, to merely teach them the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach and say, okay, now good, you've got these concepts. Even if you teach them all the commandments and all the details, and they themselves are very involved in it to the degree that they're supposed to be, which is a great degree. Nonetheless, if they haven't grasped the concept of teaching others, and particularly teaching their children, then the full purpose is not yet fulfilled. And it's interesting that this is related to the first problem that we discussed. The first problem we discussed was that as a principle of a community, taking upon an incorrect principle that they're not going to try to teach others, that is on a communal level, and that's wrong, and that needs to be corrected by teaching others. But similarly, in a family unit, it's a mistaken idea to think that the parents' service of God is somehow distinct and different from the children's. On the contrary, the children must be educated. They must be raised in understanding the purpose of their creation, and then the whole purpose of creation, which is that all of humanity is meant to serve God. So that's the second challenge that's found in Bnei Noach communities and families that undertake to observe the 7 laws of Noach. There is this big challenge of lack of continuity, lack of chinuch. Chinuch is the process of Jewish emulation from generation to generation that creates continuity, and not just continuity. It's meant to create an ever-increasing strength, because the benefit of every following succeeding generation adds to what they learned from the previous generations and the example of the previous generation. Now, a third issue that arises is that, as we've discussed, that the Torah teaches us, and we brought specifically the language of Maimonides, of the Rambam, that a non-Jew, in order to reach the tremendous heights of spiritual service, of being one of the Chasidei Umas Ha'olam, one of the not just righteous, but even more so, that one of the people that is devoted to the service of God, and one of the great people of the world, which every human being is able to reach that level, he has to fulfill the commandments. He has to fulfill God's commandments, because they were commanded on Mount Sinai through Moses, our teacher, through Moshe Rabbeinu. If he doesn't do it for those reasons, even if he does the right things, but he doesn't do it for the reason that it's commanded through Moses on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, then that itself means that he's not one of the Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. And many of the benefits that he gets from the spiritual benefits from being Chasidei Umas Ha'olam is not something that he's able to reach. Now, what that means is that each one of the Jewish people is like a mini Moses, a mini Moshe Rabbeinu that is the transmitter and carrying the message of Moses that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us on Mount Sinai. And each one of us is his student, and each one of us is transmitting this Torah that Moses gave to us on Mount Sinai, and is carrying that. We're the mini Moses, and we have our congregation, so to speak, that is ready to listen to God's word, and that's what's intended on Har Sinai. In fact, it says in Masechta Shabbos and the Peichas Amud Beis that the Torah was given in 70 languages. When it was given on Har Sinai, it was given in 70 languages, and then we see also that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it down into 70 languages. The whole concept of Be'er Heitiv is in the 70 languages, and it was written in 70 languages in other times. And the 70 languages representing the languages of the non-Jews. So this is, right from the very beginning, the whole concept was that it should be brought and understood and lived by the nations of the world. Now, what that means is that for proper connection, for a non-Jew to be properly rooted and connected in the observance of being a Chassidic Umas Ha'olam, and it is through Moshe Rabbeinu. It's through a person, either Moshe Rabbeinu directly at that time, and in following generations through the mini Moses, so to speak, that is on your block, or is in your neighborhood, or is at your local synagogue. And that requires understanding that the transmitters of the truth from and uninterrupted and unadulterated, the pure teachings of the truth that were given on Mount Sinai, is carried in every generation by the Jewish people. So a non-Jewish person has to seek to learn from a Jewish person, and that's what it says in the prophecies of the coming of the times of the Messiah, that all the non-Jews are going to run and grab a Jew and say, teach us the way to serve the Lord. So this is the job of every Jewish person, but it's also the job of the non-Jew to recognize where he has to turn to for the right guidance and the right information. So one of the struggles of communities of Bnei Noach has been being able to settle down their willingness and their ability to receive guidance from rabbis. So often, communities are led by people who are bright people who were themselves leaders, and they could have been, let's say, a Christian community, and they decided that they wanted to follow the teachings of the Torah and the true teachings of the Torah, and abandon any form of idol worship. But they were still unable to accept the guidance in an enduring way of rabbis. So there's communities where they would have a rabbi for a while, and they would replace that rabbi, and then replace that with another rabbi, and then go back to the first rabbi, and a constant series of turmoil and turbulence in terms of being able to settle down and have a stable guidance that was a true guidance. And it's almost like shopping around. And the end result is a lot of confusion, a lot of lack of continuity, and unwillingness to follow the guidance of the rabbis because they just were shopping. And the end result is that leads to an unstable community because they are not taking the guidance, and it leads to breaks in that guidance. So there's nothing wrong with a person saying, you know what, I found a different rabbi I want to follow because that person speaks more to my heart. But the problem is there has to be some continuity and some sort of direct chain from Moses and from Mount Sinai. And that's only accomplished through having a Jewish teacher and having a teacher that's going to teach the truth of the Torah completely as it was given and continues to be given. It continues to be delivered into the world by God on a moment-by-moment basis. That's what a non-Jewish community that's going to be Chasidei Umas Ha'olam, the righteous of the world, they are going to have that connection through their connection with Torah teachers and with the Jewish people that are their teachers. So that's another issue that has led to the disruption of the Bnei Noach communities. Now, a fourth issue is half measures. Half measures means trying to adopt the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach and recognizing that the Torah is true, but not giving up the aspects of idol worship that are necessary to give up. So trying to hold on to things that are familiar or appealing and mixing them in. So trying to create things that say, okay, really all the Abrahamic religions, and this is somehow part of the Abrahamic religions and so forth, and trying to mix everything together, because it can be very difficult for a person who's been a devout Christian to now suddenly say, he's not going to worship a human being anymore that person has become very fond of, and they have a deep relationship with this human being that they've been serving and praying to, and has felt that person's been helpful to them. But that could be very challenging. So the end result is that there are half measures, and the half measures look like retaining a role for Jesus even after the person has now become a Bnai Noach, trying to create a role for Jesus in that belief system, and it doesn't belong, because in the Torah understanding of what's true does not leave place for a human being that's going to have any divine be a god or a part God, and it doesn't leave any place for taking teachings from a person who did not follow the teachings of the Torah. So therefore, there's no place for that. But when a person tries to create half measures, and even worse, when someone supports people in creating half measures to try to make them feel comfortable, the end result is a disaster. It's not true, and it doesn't have the ability to endure. The only thing that can endure all the trials and tribulations of life is something that's true. And something that's true is something that a person can fall back on, and actually not just fall back on, but live with and on all the time. So we have to make sure that in educating non-Jewish people, we have to be honest with them about what is true and what's not true, and what it means to be one of the Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. And it means having no traces of the mistakes of the previous generations, having no traces of the errors of previous generations. And that has to be very clear for it to become something that's going to be enduring. Now, another issue is not recognizing who people really are. So interestingly enough, one of these communities that I mentioned before in the southern United States, someone that I met had gone and visited with the leaders of that community. And he observed that in sitting with one of these leaders, talking to them, that if you paid close attention, then he noticed that the leader of this Noachide community was wearing a Masonic ring. Now, what many people wouldn't even know that. I mean, today, especially in the Jewish community, people wouldn't even be able to identify. Many people would not be able to identify a Masonic ring. You have to understand, the basics, symbolism of it, and be able to identify what a Masonic ring is to know what it means, and then even know what that means, that someone's a member of the Masons. But what was so interesting from this experience was this person reported back that this person who's leading a Noachide congregation is really a Mason. And what that means is a person is really participating and involved in a different ideology. And the Masonic concepts, in addition to the issues of what could be some of the secret and hidden Masonic concepts, but the known and Masonic concepts that are publicly available, in the sense that even the first level Masons know about it, and they talk to people who are non-Masons about it, are concepts that actually adopt a lot of the stories from the Bible and so forth, and a lot of regarding around the building of temples. That's what the Masonic temples, emulating the Solomonic temple and so forth, and a lot of principles that are based around that as substitutes for the Solomonic temple. And they really are not. They're not at all following in the Torah tradition, the Torah understanding of truth and where divine wisdom comes from. It becomes much more of a human-based society of secret mysteries. And what we see by the Torah is actually that everything is completely open. There's no secrets in the Torah. Even the parts of the Torah that were given to only special students and passed down from special students, like the Kabbalah and the Zohar and so forth, already 2,000 years ago, it was being brought into the open, and it was something that was being encouraged to be taught. And then especially in more recent times, with the Arizal, and then the coming of Chassidus, something to be encouraged to be taught to every single person, and in fact to every single human being. So you're dealing with a person who's a Mason who believes in secret mysteries and secret ideas and secret communications and secret rituals and so forth that go against, even in their purest Masonic form, without any sort of unfortunate negative influences, even in its what's the word I'm looking for, even in its by the books most basic form, is still something that's not in accordance with Torah. And that's a problem, that you see that this person clearly didn't leave that teaching, and he was still a member of it, and he's still promoting it, because if a person's wearing a ring, a Masonic ring, he's not hiding the fact that he's a member of the Masons. And he didn't even see any contradiction between being a Ben Noach and being a Mason. So that's hugely problematic. And this person was a leader of the community, of the Noachite community. So that's something that has to be, as a Jewish teacher of Bnei Noach, you have to really understand the currents of different types of ideologies. You have to be able to understand what their teachings are and what their symbolism is. And unfortunately, there's a paucity of knowledge in this area. I've seen very orthodox websites that, just out of total ignorance, are writing an article on peace, world peace, and which is a belief that comes from the Torah, and the prophet Isaiah talks about world peace. But then in writing this article, they bring symbolisms from modern movements that are really about making war and making taking destructive measures against civilization, and using their symbolism, because they use the word peace also. And just the total confusion that the person who put that article doesn't even understand the symbolism and what the origin of the symbols are. So you have to understand that you often have a situation where someone's teaching Sheva Mitzvos ben Noach, and there's kind of like this, yeah, that's okay, or there's nothing wrong with that, and it's really ignorance of the teacher, because he doesn't understand. He hears the words, and the words sound very nice, but he doesn't understand what it really represents. And so you have to educate yourself. You have to be able to understand it, that what is true and what's not true, and what are movements that are meant to destroy humanity, what are movements that are meant to go against the Torah, so that you can understand and be able to help guide people. These people are lost. They're innocently believing that following a certain movement is going to bring peace, and peace sounds like a good idea. You need to explain to them that that movement is not leading to peace, and the fact it's leading to the enslavement of human beings. So that's the key. The key is you have to understand that you cannot teach and allow this type of stuff to kind of mix in as if it's somehow similar or related or an example of. On the contrary, it needs to be clearly defined, and it needs to be shown to be something that is an opposite to the Torah. Another huge issue that leads to a dissipation of the energy for Chassidic Umas Eilum is a confusion with ecumenicalism. Now, ecumenicalism is the concept of creating a kind of one world religion where everything is just the same. And this is something that is very, very confusing. A lot of people are very confused about this. So what happens is, you'll see that in even the Christian movements, there's a lot of ecumenical churches. And it's kind of like everything's the same. Everyone believes the same thing. A lot of them have the names Universal in them, Universalist Church, Universalist, all kinds of stuff that is meant to indicate a departure from the if you want to call it the pure view of, let's say, Christianity or Islam, which were, this is the way and the only way. And therefore they went around and they said everyone had to convert to Christianity or Islam. And what's happened is become much more an ecumenical atmosphere, which means to say it's okay, everyone could do whatever they want, and all beliefs are basically the same, and all practices are basically the same, and it's all the same, and it's all the same, and it's all the same. And then everyone gets together, makes a committee, ecumenical committee, and it's made up of church leaders and imanim and rabbis and Hindu priests and everything, and it's called ecumenicalism. And this is something that is not in accordance with Torah, because Torah recognizes the value of every single human being, and recognizes God's love for every single human being, and values every single human being, but does not say that therefore it's okay whatever way they decide to choose and mix in their service of God. So you can't go ahead and say that, okay, well, just because ultimately the guy who's really into the trees and worshiping the trees, fundamentally he's worshiping God's creation. Well, I'm sorry, that's idol worship, and there's not a place for that ideology in Judaism. We do respect God's creation, but God is supposed to is the only master, and God put us in this world to be able to take the world and use it in the service of God. So if someone is coming along, and just because you like the trees, like I do, I love to see beautiful trees. I like to have trees grow on my property. I like to see beautiful forests, and I love beautiful sunsets. But that doesn't mean that a person who's worshiping the sun is somehow that's part of an okay thing to do, because this is the fundamental mistake that humanity made, which was that they went ahead and they started to worship the intermediaries. So they started to worship the trees, and they started to worship they call it Mother Nature, and create all these different gods and goddesses and worship those as a mistake, because they thought they were also had some sort of power. And it's true that God gives them tremendous ability to bestow upon the universe. The sun is giving us heat, and it's giving energy to the world, but it's all the energy that God is giving it to give to us, and it's giving it on God's command, and it's not an independent force that is meant to be worshipped. So this is one example. The same thing is with, let's say, Christianity or Islam. Do they have points that they've taken from Judaism and incorporated in their religions that sound very familiar to a person who learns Torah? Well, there are many points like that, but at the same time, that is not meant to be the service of mankind when Mashiach comes. That's what the Rambam clearly says. And our job is to be honest to the world and say to the world, this is something that has brought you a recognition of the oneness of God. This is something that has brought you to the ability to see the concepts of one God, the concepts of a messianic era, the concept of a messianic redeemer. These are all concepts that were brought to the world through the teachings of the Torah that got mixed in with other things through and to other religions. But that's not the same as saying, you know what, everything's the same, everyone's praying to the same God, everything is the same, and let's make an ecumenical committee. That is actually the intention of that is the opposite of the noble cause which it sounds to proclaim. It's actually meant to dissipate the truth. It's actually meant to obfuscate the truth and make the truth less clear, so that people can't figure out where the answers are anymore. We've said very clearly in all these classes that the whole point, and quoting Rabbi Yonason Steif, that as the world descends into a state of atheism, the governments do, but the human beings recognize the chaos that results in the disaster and the crumbling of civilization. They're going to come to the Jews and say, teach us the way. So it's not proper for anyone to be saying, oh, you know what? You could go and ask a Jew, or you could go and ask this person or that person. All these people have different beliefs, because that's just misleading the world into further darkness. The only answer is that there is one truth. And there's one truth that embraces all of humanity, but recognizes that all of humanity has gone astray in some of its practices and some of its beliefs. And those beliefs have dissipated the energy of humanity into falsehood, into darkness, and into the lack of a spiritual backbone that's able to stand up to Amalek and able to stand up to the darkness that comes into the world when there is a lack of truth. All the things that we're seeing now are the decay and the result of the teachings of the partial measures and the half measures of incorporating some Torah with some other teachings. What happens is, at first it looks good, it looks better than what was in certain sense, but then eventually it runs out of steam because it has no enduring truth to it that can let it withstand the challenges, and it starts to crumble on itself, so that we see today there's no real moral leadership that's able to guide the world except for the Torah. So therefore, when you look at Bnai community, the Hasidic Umas Ha'olam, have to clearly educate them and clearly guide them that there's no place for ecumenicalism at all. There is only one truth, and as challenging it is for someone, as we said before, someone who has had a developed a relationship, thinking that God's beneficence and God's goodness and God's love was coming to them through intermediaries. No matter how hard it is to give up on those intermediaries, it's absolutely essential to give up on those intermediaries, because you have to come to recognize the true God. It's like if I mail a paycheck to my employee, and my employee gets it in the mail and starts thanking the postman so much, thank you for giving me the money and giving me my income and so forth. It's not a correct acknowledgement of where the money came from. And that's me as an employer. Well, how much more so, the money's not really coming from me, it's coming from God. So it would be just as absurd for the employee to come to me and start bowing down and thanking me for the money. They're supposed to be thanking God. I have to recognize I'm just the conduit for this income for the person. So it would be a falsehood for me or anyone to tell him it's a good thing he's bowing down to the mailman, and it'd be a falsehood for me to tell him it's a good thing he's bowing down to me as his employer, because I'm misleading him. I'm continuing his darkness, and the darkness is this human being is going in. And this is, we see Abraham Avinu went to the trouble of taking people who were bowing down to dust because they thought the dust was something worth worshiping, and he took them into his house, but he made them wash the dust off their feet, because you have to make a clear separation between what's right and wrong. He didn't say, oh, come in with the dust of your gods on your feet, and then put your feet up here on my sofa and relax. I'm going to give you food. That would be hospitality, but that wouldn't be truth. They would be well fed. They would be appreciative of him. They would then go back and bow down to the dust some more for thanking them for helping them find Abraham's tent, but it wouldn't be truth. So the first thing he did is he said, wash off your feet. Wash off your feet, so that you are making a clear separation. When you come into my space where I'm your teacher, I'm making it very clear to you what's right and what's wrong. And it's because of this lack of correct direction that the communities can be led astray. They're very well-meaning people. They want to recognize the mistakes of the past and what they believed and what they've served, but they end off being told that it's okay if they keep this, they keep that, or they kind of meld and get together with other communities, other belief systems, other ideologies, as if somehow that's okay. So that's another huge issue that needs to be avoided. Another issue that relates to the challenges with forming a Bnei Noach community, a Chassidic Umas Olam community, and one that will gain traction and endure and then snowball, is a lack of support from the Jewish community. And what happens is that there's a lot of times a family will be interested in the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. They'll want to become Bnei Noach, and they'll come to the local rabbi. Often it's a Chabad rabbi, since there's Chabad houses in many parts of the world, but it could be in big cities where there's many Orthodox rabbis. And the Orthodox rabbis don't really know what to say to them. So they find a rabbi who knows what to say to them. Now, the challenge is, the rabbi doesn't know how to necessarily treat them. And the problem is, there's this person. Can you imagine, let's say you are a person as a non-Jew, and his kids go to a non-Jewish school where they learn either atheism or some idol worshipping ideology. And now they're going to take the kids out of that school because they can't send their kids to the atheist school. They can't send their kids to the school that's teaching other things that are not true. And then now he's got to find a place for his kids to learn. Okay, so he's going to homeschool them. Fine. Now what's he going to do? Where do the kids play soccer? Where do they play baseball? Where are they going to have just the normal interactions? Who's coming over to the barbecue on Sunday afternoon? Who are they going to play catch with on the street? And the lack of community, a lack of support, is something that then becomes very, very disheartening, because human beings are social creatures. We are people of community. It's only the very rare person, and often we think of them as oddballs, because there's something a little bit odd about a person who really prefers to live completely isolated from humanity. Every human being wants to live in a community. And some of us more in the center of it, some a little more like are quiet and like the trees around us, and maybe we see people less frequently. But the fact is, we're all human beings, and we all want to have a communal life. So there's a failure on the part of the teacher. The teacher's responsibility is to show the non-Jewish person, to give them the tools on how to build a community, how to find like-minded people, and to provide the support that's necessary for that. To provide the support, the teacher, the rabbi, has to provide the support, has to provide the love and intention to making sure that they're helped to make activities for their kids. don't let them leave themselves. They can't just withdraw from one community from where they're grounded and all of a sudden just be like, isolated hermits in the middle of civilization. That's really not the way it's supposed to be. So there has to be effort made into building the community simultaneously by providing the support. Now the question is, where is this non-Jew supposed to go to pray? So I asked this question, and the fact is we see that number one, before we get to the answer, we see it says by the Beis HaMikdash, Beisi Beis Tefillah Chol Ha'omim, which means that the Beis HaMikdash is the house of prayer for all the nations. The real direction in which every human being is meant to pray is to Jerusalem and towards the temple in Jerusalem, because that is where the divine presence is palpably felt. God's presence is everywhere all the time, but there's a so to speak a focal point for that in the temple in Jerusalem, and all humanity is meant to pray there. So the house of prayer, the temple in Jerusalem, the holy temple, is meant to be a house of prayer for all the nations, where every human being can come and pray. So we see that there's no concept of there's the Jewish temple, and then we'll build another building over there for the non-Jews. That's just not the way it works. There's one house of prayer, and all humanity comes to that house of prayer, and we see that by Yirmiyahu Binman has a book called The Seven Colors of the Rainbow, and he brings there archaeological archaeological work that says that there was a synagogue in Turkey where they found, in the archaeology, they found two columns of supporters. And list, there was the Jewish supporters and then what they called the God-fearers. But these people had contributed to building this temple, a synagogue. Similarly, we see by people who've been teaching the Sheva Mitzvos Bnai Noach, following the Rebbe's words, where the Rebbe talks about 770 Eastern Parkway as being the Mikdash Ma'at and so forth, and the Beis Rabbeinu Shebabavel, that bringing, and it's also basic in that context, Rebbe using the words Beisi Beis Tefillah Chol Ha'omim, that they brought their students into 770 on Rosh Hashanah and for to hear Tekiyah Shofar, because Rosh Hashanah is the new year for all mankind, and Rabbi Rogalski, author of The Path of Righteous Gentile, takes his students under his talus during Birkus Kohanim. So this is the concept of the Beisi Beis Tefillah Kol Ha'omim, and I myself have had non-Jewish people come to shul and invite them to shul because this is where they're supposed to pray. And so now getting down to the practical halacha, the fact of the matter is it's forbidden for them to create separate houses of worship because there is nothing to put in the other houses of worship. The center of the service in a synagogue, in what we call the sort of the miniature temples, is the divine service of the prayers that and the reading of the Torah. And there is no Torah that they have in their buildings for them to read. They have to hear the Torah read. They have to hear the prayers said, and they have to pray under Jewish tutelage. And they have to sit in the classes that are taught on how to live life like a good human being. So, in asking this shaila, I asked Rabbi Ozdaba, what would be the proper course of action? He says not only should they come to a regular shul, but you can't create a separate section for them. Because originally, when I was thinking about this in a practical concept, I was saying, well, maybe you should have you have a men's section, a women's section, and a section for the Chassidic Umas Ha'olam. He says, no, on the contrary, you cannot or create the impression that there is a separate religious identity. There's a separate purpose for these human beings. There's a separate role they have in humanity, but they're not to be sent off into like a separate service. They're not to create their own religious service at all. So now that's really the proper context. So when you have a non-Jewish family and you have a shul, the proper thing is, as the non-Jewish family comes more observant, they should be coming to the synagogue and they should be praying, and they should be learning how to pray, and they should be following along in the Jewish prayer book, which we'll have another class and talking about what the prayers they should be saying are, to whatever level they're up to. And this is the concept of being able to provide them a proper spiritual home. You're providing them a spiritual home. It's not just prayer, is not just a intellectual experience. It's a heartfelt, grounding experience into who we really are as human beings and getting in touch with what our soul really is. So that's the way it's meant to be. So we have to think, and we have to be structuring and building communities for these people where the focal point of their spiritual life is in the same synagogues that we daven in. And the natural consequence of this is obviously that we're going to have many, many more times synagogues than we have now, and they're going to be much, much bigger than they are now. Because right now they're only built to serve a minority of the population. Maybe 1% of the population in a city or less is Jewish people, but these synagogues have to serve the entire population of the city. That's what the Eibishter's, that's what God's vision is for humanity. That the Jewish people are called the priests unto the nations. We are the Mamlechas Kahanim. We're the ones that are meant to lead the services. We're the ones that are meant to light up the way for all of humanity to have a place to come and pray. So that is the solution to the problem that we're talking about, that when you have a person that wants to serve God, but is told, stand over there or pray at home, the confusion that they have and the feeling of isolation they have is truly unfortunate, and it's not proper. And well, then what happens is a person is faced with a choice, and this is a real choice that a person has. A person's faced with the choice that they came from a community of people that were a community of human beings, is warm and friendly and a nice community, whatever their background are. People get along and they have a nice time together. They realize that community, however, as nice as it is mistaken on many of their teachings, and they decide they're going to follow the teachings of truth, the teachings of the Torah. So then they isolate themselves in that community. They try to seek some sort of community with the Jewish people. The Jewish people, if they look at them and say, well, you're not Jewish, you're almost Elam, it's such a tremendous milah, but there's no place for them in the Jewish community. And the end result is they're now torn. They're torn to, God forbid, a life of feeling isolated and alone. One of the only people that's following the path of Chassidei Umas Elam, and or returning to the place they came from the communities they came from. And what you see, practically speaking, is that slipping back, because the need for human contact is so real and it is so valid, that it is something that comes as a genuine challenge to the beliefs and the understanding of what's right and wrong. It becomes a definite challenge. And this is not in any way judgmental of these people. My heart goes out to them because it makes perfect sense to me. You can understand as much as you want about the truth of Judaism and the truth of Torah and the Chassidei Umas Elam and the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, but if you're feeling completely isolated and alone, then that is a very, very difficult situation, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. So it's our job to create that sense of community, to help them establish that sense of community as more and more people come, making sure that they feel appreciated, they are encouraged to create their communal infrastructure, that they are now able to establish themselves as a community, which is part of the one community of all humanity, and coming to the shul to daven. But don't forget that they're also responsible to set up courts of justice. If you see ahead to the vision of the Navi, now you've got 1, 2, 3, 10 non-Jewish families. Now you want to show them how to set up courts of justices, that how disputes among themselves can be resolved, and as more people can be added to that, and the rabbi could serve as the judge, as we learned in the Rambam in a previous class, that if they don't have judges, a Jew could serve as the judge, but also encouraging them and educating them that they could serve as the judges, and you will create a new leadership, a new framework for an entire civilization with these wonderful people that want to serve God and want to serve the God of Israel, want to serve the one God of all creation. So that's the vision that every Jew has to have, to see these people as he's creating the framework for civilization. And it's not just that he's passing them intellectual information and then leaving them. He's the Jewish teacher that is responsible for their entire 24 hours a day to make sure that it's a spiritual experience and that they are able to start their day with gratitude and end the day with gratitude and have the type of human interaction that is part of the way Hashem created us, and is itself the part of the fabric, and it's a spiritual experience. Human beings getting together is a spiritual experience. So that has to be created, and that will, once we see that, we will automatically be able to have the concept of the Chassidic Umas Elam literally multiply and like lightning and explode overnight, because this is what has been missing all this time since the Rebbe's call for the teaching of the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. These issues have not been addressed. Because they're not addressed, then it doesn't just catch off. It doesn't just take off. It doesn't catch together. It doesn't coalesce, because everyone's dealing with these individual struggles that are real human struggles, and without the support, it just leads to isolation. And this actually leads to another problem that we see, because the person who wants to seek the truth and wants to live the truth tries to become a Chassidic Umas Elam, and then they are isolated from their original community. They no longer have the original support and friends, and they don't necessarily know how to influence those people to now come to the truth. And they're feeling isolated and alone. They think that the only alternative is to convert to Judaism and become an observer of the 613 commandments. But it wasn't really meant for them spiritually to make that transition. They're only doing it in that case, and I've seen examples of this, of people who made the transition because they didn't really want to become a Jew and didn't want to become an observer of the 613 commandments, but that was the only way that they could get themselves the support and the warmth of community, because there was no community of Chassidic Umas Elam, and they didn't want to go back into the community of people that were led astray by teachings that support things that are against the Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. Now, the tragedy of that is, it's a real human tragedy, because they really try to observe Judaism. They really try to observe the 613 commandments, and they really mean well. But in many cases, they actually end off, God forbid, just really leaving it all, because, and sometimes even going back to the places that the churches and places they came from, because they weren't really, the concept of observing all the 613 commandments was not really meant for them. Their soul was perhaps meant to stay as Chassidic Umas Elam. We see that the Rebbe told a number of people that they should stay as Chassidic Umas Elam and not convert all the way to Judaism. That was something, to become a Jew, that was something that we see the Rebbe has said to people. So this person converted out of the isolation, and then it just was something that was really not something that was able to stick with him and them to stick with it. And as a result, things slid backwards for them in a very way that was not a good experience for them or for everyone in the community, obviously. And I've been involved in situations like that where I've seen that happening, and it's a result of a painful void. No one did anything wrong. Everyone did the best thing they could under the circumstances, but it was really driven by a void. That's really the responsibility of the Jewish community and the Jewish people, to help ground these people as Bnei Noach, as Chassidic Umas Elam, and then they will have that grounding, not only with their Creator, but with the rest of humanity, and they will feel that sense of stability and serenity, which every human being is meant to have. So these then are the main concepts that I wanted to share in this class of what are the issues that we face. And just to quickly recap, number one is that we have the issue where a community can just sort of create its own self-limitation and not be able to teach anyone else, and therefore never grows and never expands. We have the situation where the parents are not teaching the children. We have the situation where there's a break in the chain of communication of transmission of the Torah by the community that is created of Chassidic Umas Elam. They decide that they're not going to follow direction from the rabbis, and as a result, they go off in their own direction, and then it can't survive by definition. It will then just become a lot of well-meaning people that just get lost in a lot of different thoughts. We talked about the half measures, where communities and individuals, they try to hold on to all old ideas, We talked about the problem of people still holding on to other ideologies. We gave the example of the person who was a leader in a community, who was a Mason. We talked about the problem of mistaking the truth of the Torah and mistaking the similarities of certain ideas that are found and used in other beliefs and other religions as being somehow an indication that everything is true, and that's just simply not the case, and it leads to a diminution and a dissipation of the energy of the truth. We talked about the lack of support from rabbis they're approached by non-Jews, and they don't know what to tell them, and they leave them spiritually thirsty and unsustained and unnurtured. That's a huge problem. And then we have the lack of community support when that person does make the transition to the truth, making sure that they have a communal support. So this obviously requires a tremendous amount of intention and understanding of the importance of this. But this is the transformation of the world to the times of Mashiach. There's no mystery to the coming of Mashiach. This is the transformation of the coming of the world to Mashiach, because we see that when Mashiach comes, the major chiddush of Mashiach is going to be the Hashpah and Ummas Ha'ilam. They're going to have all these things. First of all, there's going to be the clarity of what's true and what's not true. There's going to be the explosive, excited teaching of everybody, by everybody. As soon as someone understands this, as soon as someone grasps this, they're going to run to teach their neighbor. We're going to have the elimination of all the false ideas and everything that all the other ideologies and religions will just dissolve on their own, because it's clear, it will become clear what the truth is, and the people who follow those in the past will recognize what the real truth is, because they've picked up some of the ideas from the things they've been following until now, but then they're going to see that all the other trappings are not necessary. We're going to see the Jewish people stepping into their role as the teachers, and we're going to see that there's going to be this massive Chasidic Ummas Ha'ilam community. They'll have everything that community needs. Places to get together and places to play games together, and all the things that a community needs, and to feel a sense of community are gonna blossom and grow. So this is exactly what Mashiach looks like. And so the call of the hour, and what the Rebbe has been talking about incessantly and continues to drive home this message, is that this is in our ability to do. It's on one hand, it sounds huge. It is huge. It's a transformation of the entire world. On the other hand, it starts with one person at a time, and one person leads to two, and two leads to 100, and 100 leads to 1,000. And as I said before, they're calculating that the world's population, if you divide it by the number of Jews, we've got 26,000 students each. We need to step up to the plate and create a sense of community for these 26,000 human beings. Each one of us, each one will have shuls we're going to have, if we think about it, we need 10 Jews to make a minyan, and each Jew is going to have 26,000 students. So we need to build synagogues about 260,000 people each. So this is the order of magnitude of God's vision, and God certainly has the ability to make all these things happen. And feel free to ask questions and to be in contact. But my tefillah is that everyone should take this to heart, and we should begin the process and accelerate the process of bringing Mashiach into the world and creating the very, very incredible life of humanity that's been God's vision since the beginning of creation, and is the mission of our generation. It's the generation that's going to see and is seeing now the unfolding of the coming of Mashiach. This is our job. This is our role. This is our mission. This is our merit, to be able to put this into effect, to do it with simcha, b'tuv levav, that it's a joyous experience to be able to create such an incredible world, a world of abundance, where there's going to be abundance reaching and fulfilling every single human being. And that's something that we can create right now, and we are creating it. And in the Mitzvah Shem, everyone is listening to this will spread the message and themselves begin this process. And we'll support each other and share lessons and ideas on how to even bring even greater abundance and even greater spiritual treasures to the entire humanity, to bring these incredible spiritual treasures to the entire humanity, will be zeicha to see and be celebrating together with all our students in the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi that will come down and take it from Yad Mamish.